Your grandfather worked 30 years at General Motors and retired with a pension that paid him $3,000 a month for life. Healthcare included. Cost of living adjustments guaranteed. He never worried about the stock market, never managed investments, never stressed about running out of money. You work the same hours, pay more taxes, and you have a 401k with $47,000 in it that lost 20% last year. No guaranteed income, no health care, no security, and if you live to 90, you'll probably run out of money at 78. This wasn't inevitable. This was engineered. Between 1974 and 2006, 4 specific decisions, made by 4 different architects, systematically dismantled the retirement security your grandparents enjoyed and replaced it with a system designed to extract fees while transferring all risk to you. And here's what nobody tells you. The people who designed this system knew exactly what they were doing. They had the studies. They saw the projections. They understood that replacing pensions with 401ks would devastate retirement security for 100 million Americans. They did it anyway, because it was wildly profitable for corporations and the financial industry, and catastrophic for you was just collateral damage. Let me show you the 4 architects, the 4 decisions that stole your retirement, and why the system is now mathematically impossible to escape. Decision 1, 1974, Gerald Ford and the ERISA trap. Before 1974, pensions were simple. Companies promised workers a specific monthly payment for life after retirement. These were called defined benefit plans. You worked your years, you retired, you got paid. The company managed the pension fund, invested the money, and carried the risk. If the investments did poorly, the company had to contribute more. If employees lived longer than expected, the company paid more. All the risk sat with the employer. Workers just collected their checks. It wasn't perfect. Some companies underfunded pensions. Some went bankrupt and workers lost everything. The most famous case was Studebaker in 1963. The automaker collapsed and 4,000 workers lost their entire pensions overnight. This created political pressure. Workers wanted protection. Unions demanded reform. And in 1974, Congress passed ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. President Gerald Ford signed it into law on Labor Day, September 2, 1974. It was sold as the most important worker protection legislation since Social Security. The law would protect pensions, guarantee benefits, and ensure workers got what they were promised. That's what they said. Here's what ERISA actually did. The law created complex regulations for pension funding. Companies had to follow strict accounting rules, maintain minimum funding levels, and report their pension obligations to the government. This sounded good. Transparency, accountability. But here's the trap ERISA created. It made pensions expensive and legally complicated. Before ERISA, a company could run a pension plan informally, contribute when profits were good, adjust benefits when necessary. There was flexibility. After ERISA, pensions became rigid legal obligations with massive compliance costs. Actuaries, auditors, government filings, insurance premiums to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. The administrative burden became enormous. Small and medium companies couldn't afford it. So they stopped offering pensions. In 1975, 40% of private sector workers had defined benefit pensions. By 1985, it was 35%. By 1995, it was 23%. Today, it's 12%. ERISA didn't protect pensions. It made them so expensive that companies abandoned them. But here's the darker mechanism. ERISA also created the legal framework for what came next, because buried in the law was a provision allowing companies to offer defined contribution plans as an alternative to pensions. Defined contribution means the company contributes a defined amount, say 3% of your salary, into an account. But they don't promise you any specific benefit. Whatever the account grows to, that's what you get. All the investment risk transfers to you. In 1974, almost nobody used defined contribution plans. They were considered inferior, risky, inappropriate for retirement security. But ERISA made them legal, regulated, and equivalent to pensions under the law. The trap was set. Gerald Ford didn't intend to destroy pensions. He genuinely believed ERISA would protect them. But the law's complexity created the corporate incentive to abandon defined benefit plans and switch to defined contribution. And 7 years later, someone gave them the perfect vehicle to do it. Decision 2, 1978 and 1981, Ted Benna and the 401k accident. In 1978, Congress passed the Revenue Act. It was a tax bill, mostly about corporate taxes and deductions. Buried on page 1848 was a provision called Section 401k. It was a minor tax code change that allowed employees to defer compensation into retirement accounts without paying taxes immediately. Nobody paid attention to it. It was technical, obscure, seemingly irrelevant. Then Ted Benna read it. Benna was a benefits consultant in Pennsylvania. In 1980, he was working with a client, a bank that wanted to create a retirement savings plan for employees. Benna was looking for legal ways to structure it when he noticed Section 401k. He realized something nobody else had seen. The language of 401k could be interpreted to allow employees to contribute their own pre-tax salary into retirement accounts, and companies could match those contributions. It would be tax-deferred, voluntary, and employer-sponsored. Benna designed the first 401k plan in 1981 for his own company, the Johnson Companies. Employees could contribute part of their salary. The company would match a percentage. The money would grow tax-free until retirement. It was supposed to be a supplement to pensions, extra savings on top of guaranteed benefits, but corporations saw something else. They saw an escape hatch. Because here's what a 401k does. It transfers 100% of investment risk from the company to the employee. With a pension, if the stock market crashes, the company has to contribute more to make up the shortfall. With a 401k, if the market crashes, your account loses value, and that's your problem. With a pension, if you live to 95, the company pays you for 30 years of retirement. With a 401k, if you live to 95 and your money runs out at 80, you're destitute. With a pension, the company employs professional investors to manage a billion-dollar fund. With a 401k, you, someone with no financial training, are expected to pick investments from a menu of mutual funds you don't understand. The risk transfer was total, and corporations realized they could save billions. By 1983, major corporations started offering 401ks. By 1985, they were common. And by 1990, companies were freezing their pension plans and pushing everyone into 401ks. The language was careful. They didn't say, "We're eliminating your retirement security." They said, "We're giving you control and flexibility." They called it empowerment. But the math was clear. A typical pension paid 60% of your final salary for life. A typical 401k, even with company matching and decent returns, would provide maybe 25 and 30% of your salary, and only for as long as the money lasted. Retirement security was cut in half, and the risk of outliving your money became your burden alone. Ted Benna later admitted he created a monster. In interviews in the 2000s and 2010s, he said the 401k was never meant to replace pensions. It was supposed to be supplemental. He watched in horror as corporations used his creation to dismantle guaranteed retirement. He called it a tax break that got out of control. But by then it was too late. The 401k had become the American retirement system, and Wall Street was about to turn it into the greatest fee extraction machine ever built. Decision 3, 1990s, Alan Greenspan and the pension fund casino. By the 1990s, trillions of dollars were flowing into 401ks and what remained of pension funds. This created a problem for Wall Street: how to extract maximum fees from this money. The answer came from deregulation, and the architect was Alan Greenspan, Federal Reserve Chairman from 1987 to 2006. Greenspan was a true believer in market efficiency. He thought regulation was unnecessary because markets self-corrected. He believed financial innovation was always good, and he trusted that institutions would manage risk responsibly because it was in their interest to do so. He was catastrophically wrong, but his belief shaped policy for 2 decades. In the 1990s, Greenspan pushed for and supported the deregulation of derivatives, the repeal of Glass-Steagall, and the loosening of restrictions on pension fund investments. Before the 1990s, pension funds were required to invest conservatively, mostly bonds, some blue-chip stocks, heavy diversification, minimal risk. The idea was simple. This is retirement money. It must be protected. But in the mid-1990s, regulations were relaxed. Pension funds could invest in derivatives, hedge funds, private equity, complex structured products. They could use leverage. They could make speculative bets. The justification was that sophisticated professional managers could earn higher returns with these tools. And higher returns meant better funded pensions and bigger 401k balances. Here's what actually happened. Pension funds started behaving like hedge funds. They invested in mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, financial weapons they didn't fully understand. When markets went up, returns looked great. Pension fund managers got bonuses. Everyone celebrated. But when markets crashed, 2000, 2008, 2020, pension funds lost billions. State pension systems like CalPERS, the largest public pension in America, lost over 30% in 2008. Corporate pensions lost similar amounts, and here's the mechanism that destroyed you. When pension funds lose money, they become underfunded. They have more obligations than assets. Companies and governments are supposed to contribute more to close the gap, but they don't. Instead, they use accounting tricks, lower their return assumptions, and push the shortfall into the future. The gap grows larger every year. Today, state and local pension systems in America are underfunded by $1.3 trillion. Corporate pensions are underfunded by hundreds of billions more. These obligations will never be fully paid, which means promised benefits will be cut. Retirees will get less than they were promised, and taxpayers will get stuck with bailouts. But the real devastation was in 401ks. Because when your 401k loses 40% in a crash, as many did in 2008, you don't have a company backstop. You just lost half your retirement. And here's the cruelest part. The financial industry made billions in fees regardless. Mutual funds charge expense ratios, typically 0.5% to 1.5% annually. Financial advisors charge 1% of assets under management. 401k administrators charge record-keeping fees. These fees are extracted every year whether your account goes up or down, and over a 40-year career, fees can consume 30% of your total returns. A study by the Department of Labor found that a 1% annual fee reduces your retirement savings by 28% over 35 years. That means if you should have $500,000, fees leave you with $360,000. The financial industry extracts an estimated $110 billion per year in fees from retirement accounts. That's $110 billion that doesn't compound for your retirement. It compounds for Fidelity, Vanguard, and Merrill Lynch. Greenspan's deregulation turned retirement savings into a casino where workers take all the risk and Wall Street collects fees regardless of the outcome. He retired in 2006, celebrated as the maestro who managed the economy brilliantly. 3 years later, the system collapsed and millions of Americans lost half their retirement savings. Greenspan later admitted he was wrong about market self-regulation. He said he found a flaw in his ideology, but your retirement is still gone. Decision 4, 2006, George W. Bush and the Pension Protection Act. By 2005, the pension crisis was undeniable. United Airlines had just dumped $10 billion in pension obligations onto the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. Other airlines were doing the same. Auto companies' pension shortfalls were ballooning. Congress needed to act. And in 2006, President George W. Bush signed the Pension Protection Act. It was marketed as the solution, the law that would save pensions and protect workers. It did the opposite. The Pension Protection Act had one real purpose: help corporations escape their pension obligations legally. Here's how it worked. The law required companies to fully fund their pensions within 7 years. This sounded strict. But the law also gave companies massive loopholes to avoid actually doing it. First, the law allowed companies to use credit balances, basically accounting fictions where previous overfunding could be counted as current contributions even if no money was actually deposited. Second, it allowed companies to smooth their pension returns over multiple years. If the stock market crashed and the pension lost 30%, the company could pretend it only lost 10% per year over 3 years. This delayed recognition of shortfalls and avoided required contributions. Third, and most importantly, the law made it easier for companies to freeze pensions. They could stop accruing new benefits, close pensions to new employees, and push everyone into 401ks. The law was written by corporate lobbyists and blessed by Congress, and it worked exactly as designed. Between 2006 and 2016, over 1,000 major corporations froze their pension plans. IBM, Verizon, General Electric, Lockheed Martin, companies that had promised pensions for a century, shut them down. The justification was always the same: increasing costs, market volatility, regulatory burden. But the real reason was simple: 401ks are cheaper. A pension obligates the company to pay you until you die. A 401k obligates them to match up to maybe 6% of your salary while you work. Once you retire, their obligation ends. The savings for corporations was staggering. General Electric alone reduced its pension obligations by $50 billion by freezing its plan. That $50 billion in liability vanished from their balance sheet and became your problem. And here's the final insult. The Pension Protection Act also included provisions that made it harder to sue companies for pension mismanagement and easier for them to cut benefits for current retirees. Courts upheld these provisions. Retirees who were promised $3,000 a month suddenly got $2,200, and they had no legal recourse. George W. Bush signed the Pension Protection Act in August 2006, surrounded by senior citizens. He called it an important step forward for America's workers. 2 years later, the financial crisis destroyed trillions in 401k value, and millions of those workers saw their retirement evaporate. The Pension Protection Act didn't protect pensions. It protected corporations from pensions. How the 4 decisions built the trap. Now let me show you how these 4 decisions combine to create a system where retirement security is impossible for ordinary Americans. Start with ERISA in 1974. It made pensions legally complicated and expensive, creating corporate incentive to abandon them. Add the 401k in 1981. It gave corporations the alternative vehicle, shift all risk to employees, call it empowerment, and save billions. Add Greenspan's deregulation in the 1990s. It turned retirement funds into speculative investment vehicles, exposed them to catastrophic losses, and created a fee extraction machine for Wall Street. Add the Pension Protection Act in 2006. It gave corporations legal permission to freeze pensions, escape obligations, and cut benefits without consequence. The result is the system we have today. Only 12% of private sector workers have pensions. 88% are on their own with 401ks. 40% of Americans have nothing saved for retirement. 0. The median 401k balance for Americans aged 55-64 is $61,000. That will provide about $300 per month in retirement. Social Security provides about $1,800, total $2,100 per month to live on. Meanwhile, the average pension for those lucky enough to have one? $2,200 per month just from the pension plus Social Security. The retirement wealth gap between those with pensions and those with 401ks is over $250,000 per person. And here's why escape is impossible. The system requires you to do everything perfectly. You must start saving in your 20s. You must contribute 15% of your salary every year. You must choose the right investments from options you don't understand. You must avoid panic selling in crashes. You must rebalance annually. You must avoid the high-fee funds. You must work until 67. You must not get sick. You must not get laid off. You must not have emergencies that force withdrawals. And you must die at exactly the right time. Not too early that you miss enjoying your money, not too late that you run out. Do everything right for 45 years and you might have enough. But 90% of people can't do this. It's mathematically impossible for most Americans. And that's not a bug. It's the design. Who profits from your retirement crisis? The financial industry extracts $110 billion annually in fees from 401ks and IRAs. But that's a money that would compound for your retirement, but instead compounds for their profit. Corporations save an estimated $300 billion per year by offering 401ks instead of pensions. That's $300 billion that used to be your retirement security, now flowing to shareholders and executive bonuses. And here's the final mechanism. When you retire with inadequate savings, you don't just suffer, you keep working. You take lower wage jobs, you compete with younger workers. You drive down wages for everyone. This benefits employers. A desperate 70-year-old will accept 15-hour because they have no choice. They can't retire. Their 401k ran out. The system creates a permanent class of elderly workers who can never stop, who have no security, who will work until they physically cannot. And every dollar they earn in those jobs is a dollar an employer doesn't have to pay a younger worker. It suppresses wages across the economy. The truth they won't tell you. Your grandparents retired because corporations and the government guaranteed it. They worked, they paid into a system, and the system paid them back. You won't retire because the guarantee was revoked. The system was redesigned to transfer wealth upward and risk downward. And the four architects, Ford, Benna, Greenspan, Bush, they didn't conspire together. They each solved a problem in a way that benefited corporations and the financial industry. Ford made pensions expensive. Benna created the 401k alternative. Greenspan deregulated retirement investments. Bush gave corporations the legal escape hatch. Each decision built on the previous one. Together, they created a system where retirement security is almost impossible unless you're already wealthy. $18 trillion in retirement obligations shifted from corporate balance sheets to individual risk. $110 billion in annual fees flowing to Wall Street. 40% of Americans with nothing saved. And a generation that will work until they die. This isn't failure. This is the system working exactly as designed. If this changed how you see retirement, if you finally understand why your 401k isn't enough and never will be, then you're starting to see how the machine works. Subscribe if you want to understand who profits from your insecurity and why they'll never fix it. Because they're not going to teach you this in school. They're going to tell you to save more and invest wisely. But the architects knew better. The game was rigged before you even started playing. And they're collecting fees either way.